The wolves had been following her for the last mile, their shadows slipping between the ancient oaks with a deliberate patience that turned her blood to ice. Aria Novak pressed forward anyway, gripping the strap of her worn canvas bag as twilight bled across the forest border, that strange no-man's land where the mapped hiking trails ended and something older began. She had taken this shortcut exactly once before, 3 summers ago, when the main road had been washed out by storms, and she had sworn never to do it again. Yet here she was, racing against the dying light because her car had broken down 15 miles back and her phone had no signal, and the thought of spending a night alone in the woods seemed worse than risking the border crossing. She had been wrong about which fear to prioritize. The wolves materialized from the underbrush with terrifying synchronicity, forming a loose ring around her as she stumbled into a small clearing where the last rays of sun barely penetrated the canopy. These were not the mangy, cautious creatures that occasionally wandered near the state parks. These were massive, their eyes gleaming with an intelligence that made her stomach drop, their movements coordinated as they tightened the circle, step by measured step. Aria stopped walking. Running would be suicide. Her mind raced through every nature documentary she had ever seen, every article about wolf encounters, but all the advice evaporated in the face of the largest wolf, a brute with silver-streaked fur and scars across its muzzle, as it lowered its head and growled, the sound resonating in her chest like a physical blow. She was about to die on a forest border because her timing belt had snapped, and she'd been too stubborn to wait for a tow truck. Then a figure stepped out of the darkness directly between her and the pack. One moment there had been only wolves and shadows and her own ragged breathing. The next, a man stood in the clearing as though he had been there all along, his presence so commanding that the wolves actually fell back a pace, their ears flattening. Aria's first thought was that she had begun hallucinating from fear. Her second thought, as her eyes adjusted to the gloom, was that no hallucination could be this beautiful or this terrifying. He was tall, his build lean but powerful beneath a long black coat that hung open over a dark shirt and tailored trousers that had no business existing this deep in the wilderness. His skin was pale as moonlight, luminous in the gathering dusk, and his hair fell in white waves past his shoulders, framing a face that seemed carved from marble and grace and something inhuman. When he turned his head slightly to glance at her, his eyes caught the last of the light and reflected it back red as garnets. "Good evening," he said, his voice warm and faintly accented, as though they had encountered each other at a garden party rather than in a wolf-ringed clearing on the edge of nowhere. "You're quite far from the main roads." Aria stared at him. The wolves were still there, still surrounding them, but their attention had shifted entirely to the stranger, their growls now uncertain, almost wary. Her voice came out as a rasp. She swallowed and tried again. "My car broke down." "Unfortunate timing," he agreed, and then, without any change in his pleasant tone, he addressed the wolves. "Gentlemen, and lady," he added, nodding toward a smaller wolf on the left, "I believe you are on the wrong side of the boundary." The largest wolf snarled, lips pulling back from teeth designed to tear flesh from bone. The man, if he was a man, simply smiled, and Aria felt the temperature in the clearing drop several degrees. "I'm being polite, Gregor," the stranger continued, his warmth never wavering even as something ancient and absolute threaded beneath his words. "I could be less polite. I suggest you take your hunting party back to your own territory before I am forced to remind you why the accord was drawn where it was drawn." The wolf named Gregor held his ground for one more heartbeat, tension crackling through the air like static before a lightning strike. Then he huffed, a sound of deep frustration, and wheeled away into the underbrush. The rest of the pack followed, melting into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared, until only the stranger and Aria remained in the clearing. Aria's legs decided they had held her upright long enough and gave out. She sat down hard on the carpet of pine needles, her hands shaking so badly she had to clasp them together. The stranger turned to face her fully, and his expression shifted into something genuinely concerned. He crossed the clearing in 3 long strides and crouched before her, bringing himself to eye level with a grace that seemed choreographed. Up close, she could see that his eyes were not merely red but layered with shades of crimson and amber, deep and fathomless, and that his features, while devastatingly handsome, carried a sharpness that no human face could quite achieve. "Forgive me," he said gently. "I should have sent them away before greeting you. You have had a significant shock." "What?" Aria managed, her voice still unsteady. "Are you?" He tilted his head, considering her with an openness that seemed at odds with everything she had just witnessed. "My name is Casimir Gravesend. I am the king of the eastern vampire territories, which includes this forest and the lands beyond it for approximately 200 miles in all directions. And you are trespassing, though I suspect unintentionally." Vampire! The word should have sounded absurd. Instead, it settled over the encounter like the missing piece of a puzzle, explaining the impossible beauty, the wolf's retreat, the way he moved as though gravity were optional. "I'm sorry," Aria said automatically, because her mother had raised her to be polite even in surreal circumstances. "I didn't know. I needed to get home." "Where is home?" Casimir asked, still crouched before her, making no move to stand or loom or do any of the threatening things a vampire king probably could do. "Millbrook, the town about 10 miles west of here." "Ah, yes, firmly within human territory and a perfectly reasonable destination." He glanced toward the darkening sky, where the last light was fading into deep purple. "Unfortunately, you will not reach it tonight on foot, and I would prefer not to send you back through the forest in the dark. The wolves are not the only danger here, and while Gregor will respect my warning, there are younger, more reckless members of his pack who might not." Aria's heart, which had just begun to slow, picked up speed again. "So what do I do?" Casimir smiled, and it was such a warm, genuine expression that for a moment she forgot to be terrified. "You accept my hospitality for the evening, rest somewhere safe, and in the morning I will have you driven home in comfort. I promise you will come to no harm under my roof." She should say no. Every instinct screamed that going anywhere with a vampire king was a catastrophically bad idea, that she should take her chances with the forest, that nothing good could come from accepting his offer. But he was still smiling at her with those impossible eyes, and the forest was growing darker by the second, and something in his manner, some fundamental warmth beneath the other worldly exterior, made her want to trust him in a way that defied logic. "Okay," she whispered. He rose to his feet in one fluid motion and extended a hand to help her up. His skin was cool against hers, smooth as polished stone, and his grip was careful, as though he were intensely aware of his own strength and hers. When she stood, he released her hand immediately, stepping back to give her space. "My home is not far," he said. "A brief walk. Can you manage, or would you prefer I carry you?" The question was asked with such casual courtesy that it took her a moment to process it. "I can walk." "Excellent." He gestured toward a gap in the trees that Aria could have sworn had not existed a moment before. "This way." They walked in silence for several minutes, following a path that seemed to appear beneath their feet, winding through the forest with an ease that suggested it had been there for centuries. Casimir moved beside her, adjusting his pace to match hers, and though Aria kept stealing glances at him, he seemed content to let her process in her own time. Finally, she found her voice again. "Those wolves. You called one of them Gregor. Do you know them?" "Intimately," Casimir replied, his tone dry. "Gregor is the enforcer for the local werewolf alpha, a gentleman named Constantine who controls the western packs. We have a standing truce that governs this border. The wolves stay on their side, my people stay on ours, and everyone benefits from the stability. Usually," he added with a slight grimace, "Gregor respects the boundaries. Tonight he was testing me." "Why?" Casimir was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Politics," he said eventually. "The accord between vampires and werewolves in this region has held for nearly a century, but it requires constant tending. There are always factions who believe they could gain more through conflict than cooperation, and they watch for any sign of weakness. Gregor's alpha recently lost a challenge from within his own pack, and though he retained his position, his authority is not as secure as it once was. Gregor was likely attempting to demonstrate strength by encroaching on my territory. And I just happened to be there." "Unfortunate coincidence," Casimir agreed, "though I am glad I arrived when I did. Gregor is many things, but patient is not one of them." They emerged from the forest into a clearing, far larger than the one where the wolves had cornered her, and Aria stopped walking entirely, her breath catching in her throat. Before her stood a mansion that seemed to have been pulled from another century and dropped whole into the wilderness. It was built of dark stone, 3 stories tall, with tall windows that glowed with warm light and a facade covered in climbing ivy that rustled in the evening breeze. The architecture was Gothic, all sharp angles and elegant arches, but it had been maintained with obvious care, the grounds manicured, the gravel drive swept clean. It looked like the sort of place that should have tours and velvet ropes and historical plaques, not a home where anyone actually lived. "Welcome to Gravesend Manor," Casimir said, watching her reaction with obvious amusement. "It has been my primary residence for the past 200 years, though the structure itself is older. I inherited it from my predecessor and have grown quite fond of it." "It's incredible," Aria breathed. "It is comfortable," Casimir said simply. "Come, you must be exhausted and hungry." He led her up the wide stone steps to the front door, which opened before they reached it, revealing a woman with the same pale skin and white hair as Casimir, though her eyes were a softer violet and her features more delicate. She wore a modern dress in deep blue, elegant but practical, and she smiled at Aria with genuine warmth. "You brought home a stray," the woman said to Casimir, her tone teasing. "I rescued a traveler from Gregor's pack," Casimir corrected. "Aria, this is Seraphine, my seneschal and oldest friend. Seraphine, this is Aria Novak. She will be our guest tonight." Seraphine's smile widened. "A pleasure. Come in, please. You look as though you have had quite the evening." Aria stepped into the manor and was immediately enveloped in warmth. The entry hall was vast, floored in polished wood and lit by an enormous chandelier that cast dancing light across tapestries and paintings that covered the walls. A grand staircase curved up to the second floor, and she could hear distant music, something classical and soothing, drifting from deeper within the house. "I will have a room prepared," Seraphine said, already moving toward the stairs. "And dinner, I assume. Human food, I mean." "Please," Casimir said, "and send word that we are not to be disturbed unless the matter is urgent." Seraphine nodded and disappeared up the stairs, leaving Casimir and Aria alone in the hall. He turned to her, his expression gentle. "I imagine you have many questions," he said, "and I will answer all of them. But first, let me show you where you can rest and refresh yourself. The evening has been unkind to you, and I would like to remedy that." Aria nodded, too overwhelmed to argue, and followed him up the staircase. The second floor was a long hallway lined with doors, and Casimir led her to one near the middle, opening it to reveal a bedroom that looked like something from a luxury hotel. The bed was enormous, covered in soft linens, and there was a sitting area with a fireplace, a writing desk by the window, and a door that led to what she assumed was a private bathroom. "This is yours for the night," Casimir said. "The bathroom is fully stocked, and Seraphine will bring you dinner shortly. If you need anything else, simply ask any of the staff you encounter. They will be happy to assist." "Thank you," Aria said, and meant it. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't." "You would have found a way to survive," Casimir interrupted gently. "You strike me as remarkably resourceful, but I'm glad I could help." He hesitated at the door, his hand on the frame. "I will be in the study on the first floor if you would like to talk once you have eaten, but there is no obligation. You are safe here, and you may rest as long as you need." He left before she could respond, closing the door softly behind him. Aria stood in the center of the room for a long moment, trying to reconcile the events of the past hour with anything resembling reality. She'd been cornered by wolves, rescued by a vampire king, and welcomed into a Gothic mansion as though she were an honored guest rather than a lost hiker who had stumbled into the wrong territory. Nothing about it made sense, and yet it had all undeniably happened. She made her way to the bathroom, which turned out to be as luxurious as the bedroom, with a deep clawfoot tub and a shower large enough for 3 people. She took a long, hot shower, washing away the dirt and fear of the forest, and changed into the soft robe hanging on the back of the door. By the time she emerged, a tray had been left on the small table in the sitting area, covered with a silver dome. Beneath the dome was a meal that looked professionally prepared: roasted chicken with herbs, fresh vegetables, warm bread, and a carafe of water along with a small decanter of wine. Aria ate slowly, savoring every bite, and felt her strength returning along with a cautious curiosity. Casimir had said she could find him in the study. She should probably just go to bed, get some sleep, and leave in the morning as planned. But she could not shake the memory of his voice, the way he had spoken to the wolves with such absolute authority, the warmth in his eyes when he had looked at her. She wanted to talk to him. She wanted to understand. She finished her meal, dressed in her own clothes, now mysteriously cleaned and folded on the bed, and made her way back downstairs. The manor was quiet, though she could sense movement in the distant rooms, soft footsteps and low voices that suggested a household going about its evening routines. She followed the hallway until she found a door slightly ajar, warm light spilling through the gap. She knocked softly. "Come in," Casimir's voice called. She pushed the door open and found herself in a study that could have belonged to a scholar or a king or both. The walls were lined with bookshelves that reached to the ceiling, stuffed with volumes in a dozen languages, and a large desk dominated one corner, covered in papers and maps. Casimir sat in an armchair by the fireplace, a book open in his lap, and he looked up as she entered, his expression brightening. "Aria," he said, setting the book aside and rising to his feet. "I hoped you might come. Please sit. Would you like tea or more wine?" "Tea would be lovely," she said, settling into the armchair opposite his. He moved to a sideboard and poured tea from a delicate porcelain pot, preparing 2 cups with practiced ease before returning and handing one to her. The cup was warm in her hands, the tea fragrant with bergamot and honey. "Thank you for dinner," she said, "and for all of this. I know I keep saying it, but I really am grateful." "You are very welcome," Casimir replied, sitting down again. "It is not often I have the opportunity to offer hospitality to someone from the human world. Most of your kind do not venture this far into the forest, and those who do are usually aware of what they might encounter." "How many people know about vampires?" Aria asked. "I mean, in the human world. Is it common knowledge or—" "It is carefully hidden," Casimir said. "There are organizations, councils, groups within the human government who are aware of our existence and who work with us to maintain the secrecy. It benefits both sides. Humans avoid unnecessary panic, and we avoid the conflict that would come from widespread exposure. But there are always individuals who stumble across the truth, as you have. We manage those situations on a case-by-case basis." "And what happens to people like me?" Aria asked, her heart beating a little faster. "Do you erase their memories? Or—" "Nothing so dramatic," Casimir said with a small smile. "You are free to remember everything, though I will ask that you be discreet about what you have seen. I trust you understand the importance of that." "I do," Aria said quickly. "I won't tell anyone, I promise." He studied her for a moment, his red eyes thoughtful. "I believe you," he said simply, and took a sip of his tea. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. Aria found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation, lulled by the warmth of the room and the easy presence of the vampire king across from her. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Of course. You said the wolves were testing you. What did you mean? Are things between you and the werewolves unstable?" Casimir sighed, setting his cup down on the small table between them. "Unstable is perhaps too strong a word, but the truce is not as solid as I would like. Constantine, the Alpha, is a reasonable man, and we have maintained peace for decades. But his pack is restless, and there are younger wolves who believe they could take more territory if they pushed hard enough. Gregor is one of those voices, though he is savvy enough not to openly challenge Constantine. Tonight's incursion was likely Gregor testing whether I would respond, and if so, how forcefully." "And you responded by being polite," Aria said. Casimir's smile returned. "Politeness backed by the implicit threat of overwhelming force. It is a delicate balance. If I had attacked Gregor outright, it could have been seen as provocation and given Constantine's rivals an excuse to push for war. But if I had done nothing, it would have signaled weakness. So I reminded Gregor of the accord and sent him home, making it clear that I was aware of the transgression, but willing to let it pass this once." "That sounds exhausting," Aria said. "It is," Casimir admitted. "But it is necessary. War between vampires and werewolves would devastate this region and spill over into human lands. I have spent a century building this peace, and I will not let it collapse because of pride or posturing." There was a weariness in his voice that surprised her, a hint of the burden he carried beneath the polished exterior. She found herself leaning forward, her curiosity deepening into something more personal. "Why do you do it?" she asked. "Why work so hard to keep the peace? You are the king. Couldn't you just, I don't know, ignore the wolves and focus on your own people?" Casimir met her gaze, and for the first time she saw something raw in his expression, something deeply sincere. "Because I have seen what war does," he said quietly. "I have lived for over 400 years, Aria, and I have witnessed more death and suffering than I care to remember. I have fought in battles that left the land soaked in blood, seen entire villages destroyed because of conflicts that began with petty grievances and escalated into madness. I do not want that for my people or for the wolves or for the humans who live in the spaces between us. I want peace, even if it costs me sleep and patience and endless negotiation, because peace is worth it." Aria felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. She had expected a vampire king to be cold, imperious, perhaps even cruel. Instead, Casimir was warm and weary and deeply, achingly sincere. She wanted to reach out and take his hand, to offer some small comfort, but she did not quite dare. "I think that is very admirable," she said instead. "Thank you," Casimir said, his smile returning, softer this time. "Now, I have answered your questions. May I ask one of my own?" "Of course." "What were you doing so far from home, alone in the forest as night fell? It seems an unusual choice for someone who does not know the dangers of this place." Aria grimaced. "Bad luck, mostly. I was visiting my grandmother in the next county, and my car broke down on the way back. I thought I could cut through the forest and reach Millbrook before dark, but I underestimated how long it would take. By the time I realized I had made a mistake, it was too late to turn back." "And your family? Will they not be worried when you do not return?" "I live alone," Aria said. "My parents moved to Florida a few years ago for my dad's job, and I stayed because I have work here. I teach at the elementary school in Millbrook, so no one will panic if I am gone overnight, though I should probably call my boss in the morning and let him know I will be late." "You are a teacher," Casimir said, his expression warming. "That suits you." "How would you know?" Aria asked, amused. "You have known me for all of an hour." "You have a patience and a kindness that suggests someone used to caring for others," Casimir replied. "And you ask thoughtful questions, which is a trait of good teachers." Aria felt her cheeks flush. "Well, thank you. I love my job. The kids are wonderful, even on the hard days." They talked for another hour, the conversation drifting from her work to his studies. He was apparently an avid collector of rare books and historical artifacts, to shared observations about the strangeness of the modern world and the ways it had changed over the centuries. Casimir was an easy conversationalist, quick to laugh and genuinely interested in everything she said, and Aria found herself forgetting, for long stretches, that he was anything other than a charming, intelligent man. Eventually, she realized she was yawning, and Casimir stood immediately. "I have kept you too long," he said. "You need rest. Come, I will walk you back to your room." He escorted her upstairs, their footsteps echoing softly in the quiet hallway, and stopped outside her door. "Thank you for the conversation," he said. "It has been a long time since I have enjoyed an evening so much." "I enjoyed it too," Aria said, and meant it. "Thank you for everything, Casimir." He inclined his head, a gesture that was oddly formal and yet entirely natural for him. "Sleep well, Aria. I will see you in the morning." She slipped into the room and closed the door, her heart beating faster than it should. She had just spent the evening talking with a vampire king, and it had felt like the most normal, pleasant thing in the world. She climbed into the enormous bed, pulled the soft blankets around herself, and fell asleep thinking about red eyes and a warm smile. Morning came gently, sunlight filtering through the heavy curtains in soft golden streaks. Aria woke slowly, disoriented for a moment before the memories of the previous night came flooding back. She sat up, half expecting to find herself in her own bed, the entire experience revealed as some fever dream. But the room was real, the manor was real, and when she looked out the window, she could see the forest stretching endlessly toward the horizon. A knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she called. Seraphine entered carrying a tray with breakfast and a warm smile. "Good morning," she said. "I hope you slept well." "I did, thank you," Aria said. "Better than I have in a long time, honestly." Casimir will be pleased to hear it. He wanted me to let you know that your car has been retrieved from where it broke down and brought here to the manor. Our mechanic is looking at it now and expects to have it running within a few hours. In the meantime, he invites you to join him for breakfast in the garden, if you are inclined. Aria felt a flutter of anticipation that she tried to ignore. That sounds lovely. Where's the garden? I will show you once you are ready, Seraphine said. Take your time. Aria ate the breakfast, fresh fruit, pastries, and coffee that tasted like heaven, and dressed quickly, running her fingers through her hair in a futile attempt to tame it. When she emerged from the room, Seraphine was waiting in the hallway, and she led Aria downstairs and through a series of interconnected rooms until they reached a set of glass doors that opened onto a garden that took Aria's breath away. It was enclosed by high stone walls covered in flowering vines, with pathways winding between beds of roses and lavender and plants she did not recognize. In the center was a fountain, water trickling softly over carved stone, and beside it, a table had been set with more food and tea. Casimir sat at the table, dressed in dark trousers and a white shirt, his hair pulled back loosely, and he rose to his feet as she approached. "Good morning," he said, his smile bright and genuine. "I hope you do not mind dining outside. The weather is too beautiful to waste." "It's perfect," Aria said, taking the seat he pulled out for her. They ate together, the conversation picking up where it had left off the night before, flowing easily between light topics and deeper ones. Casimir asked about her students, and she found herself telling him stories that made him laugh, the sound rich and unguarded. She asked about his life before he became king, and he shared glimpses of a past filled with travel and study and the slow accumulation of knowledge across centuries. Time seemed to slip away, the sun climbing higher in the sky, and Aria realized with a start that she did not want to leave. She had known this vampire, for less than a day, and yet she felt more comfortable with him than she had with anyone in years. "Aria," Casimir said gently, pulling her from her thoughts, "your car will be ready soon. I do not wish to keep you from your life, but I wonder, would you consider visiting again? I would very much enjoy continuing our conversations." She looked at him, at the hopeful expression on his impossibly beautiful face, and felt her heart turn over. "I would like that," she said. "Very much." His smile could have lit the entire garden. Over the following weeks, Aria found herself returning to Gravesend Manor again and again, each visit stretching longer than the last. Casimir had given her a phone number Seraphine's, it turned out, since he himself found modern technology more amusing than useful, and she would call ahead before making the drive, which she quickly learned to navigate even as dusk approached. The forest no longer seemed quite so threatening, though she was always careful to stay on the paths Casimir had shown her, the ones that skirted the wolf territories. She learned the rhythms of the manor, met the small staff of vampires who served Casimir with a loyalty that bordered on devotion, and discovered that the vampire king had a wicked sense of humor and a terrible habit of forgetting to eat, or rather, to drink, since his sustenance came from blood banks, that he maintained through discreet connections with human hospitals. He was fastidious about consent and ethics, he explained, and would never take from an unwilling donor. She also learned that the situation with the werewolves was more complicated than he had initially let on. It was a month into their acquaintance when she arrived at the manor one evening to find Casimir in the study, pacing before the fire with an agitation she had never seen in him before. Seraphine was there as well, her arms crossed, her expression tight. "What's wrong?" Aria asked from the doorway. Casimir stopped pacing and turned to her, and she saw the strain in his eyes. "Gregor has been pushing the boundaries again," he said. "3 incursions this week, each one more brazen than the last. He is testing whether I will respond with force, and if I do, he will use it as justification to claim I am the aggressor. Constantine is trying to keep him in line, but Gregor has support among the younger wolves, and the Alpha's authority is not what it once was." "What does that mean for the truce?" Aria asked, stepping into the room. "It means the truce is fraying," Seraphine said bluntly, "and if it breaks entirely, we will have war." "There must be something you can do," Aria said, looking at Casimir. "Some way to reinforce the agreement without resorting to violence." "I have tried," Casimir said wearily. "I have offered additional concessions, proposed joint patrols of the border, even suggested a formal summit between our peoples. But Gregor does not want peace. He wants territory and power, and he believes he can take it. Aria crossed the room and took his hand, the gesture instinctive. His skin was cool against hers, but he gripped her fingers gently, gratefully. "Then we find another way," she said firmly. "You said yourself that you have spent a century building this peace. You are not going to let it fall apart now." Casimir looked at her, and something in his expression shifted, softened. "You have remarkable faith in me." "You have earned it," she replied. Seraphine cleared her throat delicately. "If I may, there is one option we have not fully explored. Gregor's support among the younger wolves is built on the perception that you are isolated, that your authority is uncontested within the vampire territories, but untested outside them. If you were to demonstrate a connection to the wolves, a bond that goes beyond mere diplomacy, it might shift the balance." "What kind of connection?" Aria asked. An alliance," Seraphine said carefully. "Or a visible partnership with someone the wolves respect, someone who bridges the divide between human and supernatural." Casimir's hand tightened on Aria's. "No," he said sharply. "I will not use Aria as a political tool." "I am not suggesting using her," Seraphine said. "I am suggesting that her presence here, her friendship with you, is already shifting perceptions. The wolves know she comes here, that she has your protection. If you were to make that protection formal, to acknowledge her publicly as someone under your care, it would complicate Gregor's narrative. It would also make her a target," Casimir said flatly. Aria's stomach clenched. "A target for what?" Casimir turned to her, his expression pained. "If the wolves see you as someone I care about, some of them will see you as leverage. Gregor might attempt to use you to force concessions, or worse, to provoke me into a conflict that breaks the truce. I will not put you in that position." "But I am already in that position, aren't I?" Aria said slowly. "If the wolves know I come here, if they have been watching the border, they already know you care about me. Hiding it won't change that." Casimir was silent, his jaw tight. "She is right," Seraphine said quietly. "The damage, if there is damage, is already done. But formalizing it, making it clear that she is under your protection and that any harm to her would be considered an act of war, might actually make her safer. Gregor is reckless, but he is not stupid. He will not risk open conflict if he believes it will cost him support." "You are asking me to gamble with her life," Casimir said, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm asking you to trust your own strength," Seraphine replied, "and to trust her. She is not fragile, Casimir." Aria looked between them, her mind racing. She did not fully understand the politics at play, but she understood enough to know that this was a pivotal moment. Casimir could continue trying to keep her separate from the conflict, or he could acknowledge what was already true, that she mattered to him, and that her presence here had already changed the equation. "I am not afraid," she said, though that was not entirely true. "And I trust you, Casimir. If you think this could help, then I'm willing." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he shook his head slowly. "I need to think about this," he said. "Seraphine, summon the council. I want their input before I make any decisions. And Aria." He paused, his hand still holding hers. "Thank you. But I need you to understand the risks. This is not a small thing I'm asking." "You're not asking," Aria said gently. "I'm offering." Something flickered in his eyes, something deep and unguarded, and for a moment she thought he might say something more, but then he simply nodded and released her hand, stepping back. "I will have someone take you home," he said. "It is not safe for you to stay here tonight while I sort through this." Aria wanted to argue, but she could see the resolve in his face. She nodded and let Seraphine lead her from the study, glancing back once to see Casimir standing before the fire, his shoulders tense, his expression shadowed. The drive home was quiet, the vampire who served as her escort polite but uncommunicative. When Aria finally walked through the door of her small house in Millbrook, she felt exhausted and unsettled, her mind replaying the conversation over and over. She did not hear from Casimir for 3 days. On the 4th day, Seraphine called. "He would like to see you," the vampire said without preamble. "Tonight, if you are able. He has made a decision." Aria's heart leapt. "I will be there." She drove to the manor as the sun set, the forest shadows long and deep. When she arrived, Casimir was waiting for her at the front door, and the moment she stepped out of the car, he crossed to her and pulled her into an embrace that was both fierce and gentle. "I am sorry," he murmured into her hair. "I should not have sent you away. I was afraid, and I let that fear dictate my actions." Aria wrapped her arms around him, breathing in his scent, cold stone and old books, and something faintly floral. "It's okay," she said. "What did you decide?" He pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands still resting on her shoulders. "I have decided to acknowledge you publicly as someone under my protection. Seraphine was right. Hiding our connection will not keep you safe, and it may actually put you in more danger. But I have also arranged for additional security, both here and in Millbrook. You will not be left vulnerable." "When will you make the announcement?" Aria asked. "Tomorrow night," Casimir said. "There is to be a meeting between my council and Constantine's representatives, a formal discussion of the border disputes. I will make it clear then that any harm to you will be met with the full force of my authority. It is a risk, but it is one I believe is necessary." Aria nodded, trying to ignore the flutter of fear in her chest. "I trust you." His expression softened, and he lifted one hand to cup her cheek. "You humble me," he said quietly. "I do not deserve your faith, but I will do everything in my power to be worthy of it." Before she could respond, he leaned down and kissed her forehead, the gesture tender and reverent. Then he stepped back, his professional mask slipping into place. "Come," he said. "Let us have dinner and talk of other things. I've missed you these past days." They spent the evening in the garden, eating and talking and carefully avoiding the topic of the meeting. Casimir seemed determined to make her smile, and he succeeded, telling her absurd stories from his long life and asking her opinion on everything from modern music to the best way to cook pasta. By the time the moon was high, Aria felt some of her anxiety ease, replaced by a warm contentment that had become familiar in his presence. "Stay tonight," Casimir said as they walked back toward the manor. "I know I sent you away before, but I would feel better knowing you are here, where I can ensure your safety." Aria nodded. "I would like that." She slept in the same room as before, and woke the next morning to find Casimir already gone, Seraphine explaining that he was preparing for the evening's meeting. Aria spent the day exploring the manor, reading in the library, and trying not to think too hard about what was coming. As dusk approached, Seraphine came to find her. "The meeting is about to begin," she said. "Casimir would like you to be present, but only if you are comfortable. You do not have to attend." "I want to be there," Aria said firmly. Seraphine nodded and led her to a large room on the first floor that Aria had not seen before. It was set up like a council chamber, with a long table in the center and chairs arranged around it. Casimir sat at the head of the table, flanked by several other vampires Aria recognized from around the manor. Across from them sat 3 werewolves in human form, their postures tense, their eyes watchful. One of them was Gregor. Aria recognized him immediately, even in human form, the same scarred face, the same aggressive set to his shoulders. The other 2 were unfamiliar, one a woman with sharp features and silver-streaked hair, the other a younger man who looked barely out of his teens. Casimir rose as Aria entered, and every eye in the room turned to her. "Gentlemen, lady," Casimir said smoothly, "allow me to introduce Aria Novak. She is a guest in my home and under my formal protection. Any action taken against her will be considered an act of war against my territories." The room went very still. Gregor's eyes narrowed, and the woman beside him leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "You are making a human your ward?" the woman said, her voice cool. "That is an unusual choice, King Casimir." "It is my choice to make," Casimir replied, "and I am informing you as a courtesy, not asking for permission." Gregor growled low in his throat. "This is a transparent ploy. You think aligning yourself with a human will make you seem more reasonable, more connected to the mortal world. It changes nothing." "It changes everything," Casimir said, his voice sharp. "Because it demonstrates that I am invested in the stability of this region, not just for my people, but for all who live here. Aria is a teacher in Millbrook, a town that sits on the border of our territories. Her safety is a matter of mutual interest." "Or she is a weakness," Gregor said, his gaze flicking to Aria with open disdain. "A liability you have foolishly acknowledged." Casimir's expression turned glacial. "If you are suggesting what I think you are suggesting, I recommend you choose your next words very carefully." The younger wolf shifted uncomfortably, but Gregor held Casimir's gaze, unrepentant. The woman between them sighed and placed a hand on Gregor's arm. "Enough," she said. "We are here to discuss the border, not to issue threats. King Casimir has made his position clear. We will relay this information to Alpha Constantine and allow him to determine how to proceed." "Wise," Casimir said, his tone thawing slightly. "And while you are relaying information, please inform Constantine that I am willing to meet with him directly to discuss a more permanent solution to these disputes. I have no interest in war, but I will not tolerate further incursions." The woman nodded. "I will pass along your message." The meeting ended shortly after, the werewolves departing with barely concealed tension. Aria remained by the door, her heart pounding, until Casimir crossed the room to her. "You were very brave," he said quietly. "I didn't do anything," Aria replied. "You stood there while Gregor threatened you and did not flinch. That is bravery." She managed a shaky smile. "I was terrified." "So was I," Casimir admitted. "But it is done now. You are formally under my protection, and the wolves know it. Now, we wait to see how they respond." They did not have to wait long. 2 nights later, Aria was woken in her house in Millbrook by the sound of breaking glass. She bolted upright, her heart racing, and heard footsteps in the hallway outside her bedroom. Before she could scream, the door burst open and Gregor stepped through, his human form radiating menace. "Scream and I will break your neck," he said calmly. "Come quietly and you will live." Aria's mind raced. She thought of the security Casimir had promised, wondered if it had failed or if Gregor had simply been faster. She thought of running, but Gregor was between her and the door, and she had no illusions about her ability to outrun a werewolf. "What do you want?" she managed. "You," Gregor said. "You're going to send a message to your vampire king. You're going to tell him that if he wants you back, he will cede the eastern forest to our territory, and if he refuses, you will die." "He won't negotiate with you," Aria said, her voice steadier than she felt. "He doesn't give in to threats." "Then he is a fool," Gregor said, "and you will pay the price." He moved forward, faster than she could react, and grabbed her arm. Pain shot through her shoulder as he hauled her to her feet, and she cried out despite herself. He dragged her toward the window, and she realized with horror that he intended to take her through it, into the forest where Casimir's people could not easily follow. But as Gregor reached the window, a figure dropped from the roof above, landing in the yard with a grace that was unmistakably vampire. Seraphine straightened, her eyes blazing violet, and behind her appeared 2 more vampires, both armed with silver blades. "Release her," Seraphine said, her voice cold as winter. "Now!" Gregor snarled and shoved Aria toward the window. She stumbled, catching herself on the sill, and Gregor lunged at Seraphine. The two collided in a blur of motion, and Aria scrambled back, pressing herself against the wall as the room erupted into violence. The other vampires moved to intercept, but Gregor was fast and strong, fighting with a ferocity that sent one of them crashing through the bedroom door. Seraphine held her ground, trading blows with Gregor in a brutal, efficient dance, and Aria could only watch, frozen in terror. Then the front door splintered, and Casimir was there. He moved through the house like a storm, his presence filling the space with a cold, absolute fury. When he reached the bedroom, he took in the scene in an instant. Aria pressed against the wall, Gregor locked in combat with Seraphine, and his expression turned murderous. "Gregor," he said, and his voice was a whip crack. Gregor froze, then turned slowly to face the vampire king. For the first time, Aria saw something like fear in the werewolf's eyes. "You have made a grave mistake," Casimir said, advancing into the room. "You have violated the truce, endangered a human under my protection, and attacked my people. Give me one reason I should not end you here, and now." "Kill me and you start a war," Gregor spat. "Constantine will not overlook the death of one of his enforcers." "Constantine will not overlook your betrayal of the truce," Casimir countered. "You acted without his authorization, and you know it. You are a rogue, Gregor, and the Alpha will disavow you to preserve the accord. You have gambled everything on this move, and you have lost." Gregor's eyes darted toward the window, calculating, but Seraphine moved to block his escape, and the other vampires closed in from the hallway. He was surrounded, and he knew it. "I will give you a choice," Casimir said. "Surrender now, and I will turn you over to Constantine to face justice within your own pack, or fight, and I will kill you myself. Choose." For a long moment, Gregor did not move. Then, slowly, he lowered his hands, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I surrender," he said, the words bitter. Casimir nodded to Seraphine, who moved forward and bound Gregor's wrists with silver chains that made the werewolf hiss in pain. The other vampires hauled him to his feet and began leading him from the room. As soon as they were gone, Casimir crossed to Aria and pulled her into his arms. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands running over her shoulders, her arms checking for injuries. "I'm okay," Aria said, though she was shaking. "He grabbed me, but Seraphine got here before he could take me." "I should have been here," Casimir said, his voice raw. "I should have anticipated this." "You couldn't have known," Aria said, clinging to him. "It's not your fault." He held her tightly, his face buried in her hair, and she felt him trembling. "I could have lost you," he whispered. "I could have, but you didn't," Aria interrupted gently. "I'm here. I'm safe." He pulled back just enough to look at her, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. There was fear there, and relief, and something deeper, something that made her heart race for an entirely different reason. "Aria," he said, his voice low, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I'm in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. Aria stared at him, her mind reeling, and then she laughed, a sound that was half sob. "I love you too," she said. "I have for weeks. I just didn't know how to say it." Casimir's expression transformed, the fear and tension melting into something radiant. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, and it was gentle and fierce, and everything she had not known she needed. She kissed him back, pouring all her fear and relief and love into the contact, and when they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. "Come back to the manor," Casimir said. "Stay with me. I cannot bear the thought of you here, unprotected." "Okay," Aria said. "Yes." He carried her to his car. She was too shaken to walk, though she protested weakly, and drove them back to Gravesend Manor as the first light of dawn began to touch the sky. Seraphine met them at the door, her expression relieved. "Gregor is secured," she reported. "I have sent word to Constantine. He will meet with you tonight to discuss what happens next." "Good," Casimir said. "Thank you, Seraphine." She nodded and disappeared into the manor, leaving Casimir and Aria alone in the entry hall. "You should rest," Casimir said, but Aria shook her head. "I don't want to be alone right now." "Then you won't be," he said simply, and led her upstairs to his own chambers. His bedroom was similar to the guest room she had stayed in before, but larger, more personal. There were books stacked on every surface, maps pinned to the walls, and a massive bed draped in dark fabrics. He guided her to the bed and sat beside her, his hand finding hers. "I am sorry you were dragged into this," he said quietly. "You deserve a life free of danger and politics and werewolves breaking into your home." "Maybe," Aria said, "but I also deserve to choose my own life, and I choose this. I choose you." He looked at her, his expression filled with wonder. "You are extraordinary." "I'm really not," Aria said, smiling. "I'm just a teacher who got very lost in the woods." "You are the woman I love," Casimir said. "That makes you extraordinary to me." She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, and they sat in silence as the sun rose fully, spilling golden light through the windows. Eventually, exhaustion pulled her under, and she slept, safe in the knowledge that Casimir was beside her. When she woke, it was late afternoon, and Casimir was gone. She found a note on the bedside table in elegant handwriting. "Meeting with Constantine. Will return soon. Rest. You are safe here." She wandered downstairs and found Seraphine in the library reading. "Good evening," the vampire said with a warm smile. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Aria said. "What happened with Gregor?" "Casimir turned him over to Constantine this morning. The Alpha was furious. Apparently Gregor had been planning this move for weeks without informing anyone, and several of the younger wolves were involved. Constantine has disavowed them all and offered formal reparations to Casimir for the breach of the truce." "So the truce is intact?" Aria asked. "Stronger than before, actually," Seraphine said. "Constantine was embarrassed by Gregor's actions and is eager to prove his commitment to peace. He and Casimir are meeting tonight to formalize a new agreement, one that includes joint oversight of the border and penalties for future violations. It is a significant step forward." Aria felt a wave of relief. "That's wonderful." "It is," Seraphine agreed. And it is in no small part thanks to you. Your presence forced the issue, and Gregor's recklessness gave Casimir the leverage he needed to push for real change. I didn't do anything, Aria protested. You existed, Seraphine said simply, and you mattered to Casimir. That was enough. Casimir returned several hours later, looking tired but satisfied. He found Aria in the garden, watching the stars emerge, and sat beside her on the stone bench. It is done, he said. Constantine and I have signed a new accord. The border will be jointly patrolled, disputes will be mediated by a council of both vampires and wolves, and any future violations will result in severe consequences for the offending party. Gregor has been exiled from the pack and will not trouble us again. That's amazing, Aria said, taking his hand. You did it. We did it, Casimir corrected. I could not have achieved this without you. They sat together in the quiet garden, the manor rising behind them like a sentinel, and Aria felt a sense of peace settle over her. The danger had passed, the truce was secure, and she was here with the man she loved. Casimir, she said after a moment, what happens now? I mean, with us. I still have my job, my life in Millbrook, and you have all of this. She gestured toward the manor. What happens now is whatever we choose, Casimir said. I do not expect you to abandon your life for me, Aria, but I hope you will let me be part of it. We can navigate this together, find a balance that works for both of us. I would like that, Aria said, but there's something else, something I've been thinking about. What is it? She took a breath, gathering her courage. You said once that you maintain blood banks, that you never take from unwilling donors. But what about willing ones? If someone wanted to offer, would you? She trailed off, but Casimir understood. His expression grew serious. Are you asking if I would accept blood from you? Yes, Aria said. I know it's a big thing, and I don't fully understand all the implications, but I want to be able to give you that, if it's something you need. Casimir was silent for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. Taking blood from someone you love is intimate, he said finally. It creates a bond, a connection that goes beyond the physical. I would treasure such a gift, but I want you to be certain. There is no rush. I'm certain, Aria said. I trust you, Casimir. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. Then I accept with gratitude and love, but not tonight. Tonight, I simply want to be with you. They stayed in the garden until the moon was high, talking and laughing and stealing kisses beneath the stars. When they finally went inside, Casimir led her back to his chambers, and they fell asleep in each other's arms, the world outside quiet and still. The weeks that followed were a study in balance. Aria returned to her teaching job, her students none the wiser about the supernatural events that had upended her life. She spent weekdays in Millbrook, her house repaired and secured with protections Casimir had arranged, and weekends at the manor, learning the rhythms of Casimir's world. She met more of the Vampire Council, sat in on meetings where border disputes were mediated with the wolves, and began to understand the intricate web of politics and diplomacy that Casimir navigated daily. She also began to understand the depth of his commitment to peace, the way he balanced strength with compassion, authority with humility. And she fell more in love with him every day. One evening, as they walked through the forest together, no longer a place of fear but of beauty, Casimir stopped and turned to her. I've been thinking, he said, about the future, about us. What about us? Aria asked, her heart skipping. I want to offer you something, he said. Not because I expect you to accept, but because I want you to have the choice. If you wished, I could turn you, make you a vampire. You would live as long as I do, share my world fully. But I want to be clear, this is not a requirement. I love you as you are, and I will love you whether you choose to remain human or become something else. Aria's breath caught. She had known on some level that this question would come eventually, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real, immediate. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course, Casimir said. Take all the time you need. This is not a decision to be made lightly. They walked in silence for a while, hand in hand, and Aria let the question settle in her mind. She thought about what she would gain centuries with Casimir, strength, a place in his world, and what she would lose her humanity, the simple pleasures of sunlight and aging, the familiar rhythms of mortal life. It took her 3 months to decide. She told him one night in the study where they had spent so many evenings talking. He looked up from his book as she entered, and she crossed to him, taking his hands. "I've made my decision," she said. "I want you to turn me." His eyes widened. "Are you certain?" "I am," Aria said. "I've thought about it from every angle, and I keep coming back to the same answer. I want a future with you, Casimir. A real future, not one measured in decades but in centuries. I want to stand beside you, to help you build the peace you've worked so hard for, to see what the world becomes, and I can't do that as a human, not fully." Casimir rose to his feet, his expression filled with a mix of joy and solemnity. "This is not a simple process," he said. "It will be painful, and there's a period of transition where you will be vulnerable. But I will be with you every moment, and I will do everything in my power to make it as easy as possible." "I know," Aria said. "I trust you." He kissed her then, deep and lingering, and when they broke apart, his eyes were bright. "When?" he asked. "Soon," Aria said. "I need to finish out the school year. I owe that to my students. But after that, I'm ready." The months passed quickly. Aria threw herself into her work, giving her students the best year she could, and spent every free moment with Casimir, soaking up his presence, his knowledge, his love. She also began preparing for the transition, reading the books he gave her about vampire physiology and culture, talking to Seraphine and the other vampires at the manor about what to expect. When the last day of school arrived, she said goodbye to her students and colleagues with a bittersweet ache. She would miss teaching, but she knew that her future held different work, different challenges. That night, she and Casimir performed the turning. It was done in his chambers, with Seraphine present as a witness and support. Casimir explained the process carefully. He would drain her to the point of death, then give her his blood to drink. Her body would die and be reborn, the transformation taking several days. "It will hurt," he warned. "I will not lie to you about that, but I will be here and it will end." "I'm ready," Aria said. He kissed her forehead, then her lips, and then he bit into her wrist. The pain was sharp but brief, and she felt the pull of his mouth as he drank. Her vision began to dim, her body growing cold, and just as she thought she might slip away entirely, he pulled back and bit into his own wrist, pressing it to her lips. "Drink," he commanded gently. She drank, and his blood was cool and strange and powerful, flooding her system with a heat that chased away the cold. She felt her heart stutter, stop, and then restart with a rhythm that was slower, stronger. Her senses sharpened, the room coming into painful clarity, and then the real agony began. She writhed on the bed, her body convulsing as it rewrote itself, and Casimir held her through it all, murmuring words of comfort and love. Time lost meaning. She drifted in and out of consciousness, each waking moment a fresh wave of pain, until finally, blessedly, it began to fade. When she opened her eyes again, the world was different. She could see every detail of the room, the individual threads in the curtains, the grain of the wood in the bedposts, the faint shimmer of dust motes in the air. She could hear Casimir's breathing, slow and steady, and Seraphine's heartbeat in the corner, strong and rhythmic. She could smell everything: old books, the faint trace of blood, the scent of the forest beyond the windows. And she felt strong, powerful, alive in a way she had never been before. "Aria," Casimir said softly, his face hovering above hers. "How do you feel?" She sat up slowly, testing her new body, and found that it responded with an ease and grace that was dizzying. "I feel incredible," she said, and her voice was her own, but richer, deeper. Casimir's smile was radiant. "Welcome," he said, "to eternity." The transition was not without challenges. Aria had to learn to control her new strength, to manage the hunger for blood, to navigate a world that now seemed both brighter and more dangerous. But Casimir was patient, guiding her through each step, and Seraphine became a close friend and mentor, teaching her the nuances of vampire society. She also discovered that her turning had an unexpected effect on the werewolf situation. Constantine, upon learning that the human under Casimir's protection had chosen to become a vampire, saw it as a powerful symbol of the unity between their peoples. He proposed a joint council, a permanent body of vampires and wolves who would oversee the border and mediate disputes, and Casimir agreed. The first meeting of the council was held at Gravesend Manor, with Aria present as Casimir's partner and representative. She found that her human background gave her a unique perspective, allowing her to bridge gaps between the two factions in ways that pure vampires or wolves could not. She became an integral part of the negotiations, her voice respected and valued. The peace held. The border remained quiet, and Aria and Casimir built a life together that was rich and full and utterly their own. Years passed decades, then a century. Aria watched the world change from the vantage point of immortality, saw technology advance and societies shift, and through it all, Casimir was beside her. They traveled, explored, learned, and loved, their bond deepening with each passing year. They never had children. Vampires could not reproduce in the traditional sense, but they found family in the community they built, in the vampires and wolves and humans who came to trust them, to rely on their leadership and compassion. And every night, when they returned to Gravesend Manor and stood together in the garden beneath the stars, Aria remembered the night she had been cornered by wolves at the forest border, the night a vampire king had stepped out of the dark between them and changed her life forever. She had been terrified then, lost and alone and certain she was going to die. Now she was home, she was powerful, she was loved, and she would spend eternity grateful for the moment fate had brought them together. One particularly clear evening, nearly 200 years after her turning, Aria and Casimir stood on the balcony of the manor, looking out over the forest that had once seemed so threatening. The trees stretched endlessly toward the horizon, peaceful and still, the border between vampire and werewolf territory now marked by cooperation rather than conflict. "Do you ever regret it?" Casimir asked quietly, his arm around her waist. "Choosing this life?" Aria leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Never," she said. "Not once. Every moment with you has been worth it." He kissed the top of her head, and they stood together in the quiet, two immortals who had found something rare and precious, a love that transcended time, species, and the boundaries that separated their worlds. Below them, the forest whispered its approval, the wind carrying the scent of pine and earth and the promise of countless nights yet to come. The manor glowed with warm light, a beacon in the darkness, and inside, their people, vampire and wolf and human alike, gathered, safe and united, under the rule of a king who had chosen peace and the woman who had helped him build it. Aria smiled, her heart full, and thought that she could not have asked for a better eternity. This was home. This was family. This was love, and it would endure as long as the stars shone and the forest stood, and the two of them walked together through the endless nights, hand in hand, forever.